There has been massive hype this year surrounding Metaphor Re-Fantazio. This is the first title developed by Studio Zero, which is a subsidiary studio at Atlus made up of key members of past Persona and Shin Megami Tensei projects. While Metaphor Re-Fantazio is a brand new IP, it still feels a lot like it's part of the Persona series in its combat, social systems, and time constraints. Essentially, the game is what you'd get if the Persona series graduated from high school and entered a fantasy world, and I'm all for it. And I'm not the only one, because the game has sold over 1 million copies in its first day, which is insane. It's easy to see why though, as Metaphor is an incredibly solid turn-based JRPG experience, with many fans putting it in Game of the Year contention. Personally, I wouldn't go that far. While I did have an absolute blast throughout my 80-odd hour journey, I will admit that it has some minor issues. Before we get into the review, if you like this video, it would help me out a lot to hit that like button and sub for more JRPG content coming soon. I'd also like to thank the publishers for the review code, and all footage that you see is from the PS5 version of the game. Have you played Metaphor Re-Fantazio yet? What did you think? Or is it something you're interested in trying? Let me know in the comments below. Alright, let's get into it. If there's one thing that cannot be faulted about the game, it's the presentation style, and this is best highlighted with the interface. I mean, just look at these menus. They are so wild and aesthetically unique that they honestly put every other game out there to shame. Well, with the exception of the previous works from these devs. The character art and the monster designs are also really cool. The major monsters of the game named humans are just so creepy looking, and fun fact, their designs were heavily influenced by medieval painter Hieronymus Bosch. So while the visual design is outstanding, the actual graphical quality does not reach the standard you'd expect from other AAA games. Some of the environmental textures are seriously generations behind, and this is no doubt partly due to the game being in development for so long. Throughout your journey, there are several main towns to explore, and these act as the chapter's hubs. Each of these feel alive, but at times overwhelmingly so. The lack of voice acting here means that speech and sound bubbles will be popping up left, right, and center. And initially, I had no idea what I should be paying attention to. It really doesn't help that a lot of the character banter is not voiced. I missed out on a lot of dialogue because I was concentrating on everything around me and not the top left of the screen where the little dialogue box pops up. But the quality of the voice acting itself is top tier, with Hayasme being the standout for me. I just wish there was more of it, as a large amount of dialogue requires reading. And when it comes to the music, there are some killer tracks here. The main battle theme, for instance, was a standout for me. It just feels so epic with the deep male chanting in the background as you're slaughtering humans. Humans, yeah, that feels really weird to say. Maybe it's a metaphor. Metaphor Re-Fantazio is set in the kingdom of Uchronia, a medieval realm made up of different tribes, all with different social statuses. Some tribes are treated like royalty, while others are left to die on the side of the roads. At the start of the game, the king is murdered by a general named Louis, and with no true successor to the throne, the realm is thrown into a popularity contest known as the Royal Tournament. Its winner will be named the new king. Meanwhile, the main character, who is canonically named Will, and his fairy companion Gallica, set out on a quest to lift the curse placed on the true Prince of Uchronia. He has been hiding in a comatose state, presumed dead by most of the realm. By completing various missions to complete this end goal, Will ends up generating a lot of support from Uchronia's citizens, and soon becomes a possible candidate for becoming the king. Your party will be located in each of these city regions for a number of days, and within this time, you'll need to conquer the major dungeon and defeat the major boss. But this may take only a few days. The rest of the time, you can choose how to spend it, but more on this later. I really liked the story here. Traveling around the world, seeing the tensions between the leading candidates, and learning about how this shitty world actually is was always engaging. With that said, the entire story structure of Metaphor can be a double-edged sword, and not just because it's really linear. The defined deadlines to complete main missions and the overall transition from one main area to another create some sections that are very slow paced. It is very common to experience 2-hour-long blocks with no combat or dungeon crawling whatsoever. The game often forces you to take things slow, and at these times all I wanted to do was get back into the action. And it really doesn't help that everyone has something to say at all times, and this creates a lot of unengaging and often repetitive dialogue that I had no interest in. When Metaphor's story is good, it's really good, but just expect a lot of downtime with its progression. Metaphor places a large emphasis on character development and forming bonds with others, which is such a Persona-like mechanic. Starting with Will, he is a semi-silent protagonist with most of his lines coming from your dialogue choices. There are plenty of options to choose from throughout this dialogue-heavy game, but to be completely honest, I missed a good amount of them, but not through fault of my own. You see, the response choices pop up automatically at the end of character dialogue boxes. This caused me to select the first option without reading it due to wanting to progress to the next dialogue box. This was just so frustrating. Early in the game, Will awakens to his archetype powers. These archetypes serve as classes for your characters, each having their own set of abilities and stats. As each of your party members experience a climatic point in their personal struggles, they too will unlock their archetypes, and some of these moments were really awesome to witness. Outside of the main characters, each of your followers, who can be party members or other major NPCs, have their own story threads that are revealed through 8 bonding events which you'll need to view during your free time. Metaphor does a great job in this area. Most of these personal stories are really interesting, and it always feels so rewarding to increase these bond levels, as each increase provides some sort of significant benefit to the gameplay, such as unlocking new archetypes or new items in the stores. You also can't simply reach level 8 at the start of the game, as their progression is often locked behind story progression or your royal virtue stats of courage, wisdom, eloquence, imagination, and tolerance. If there's any part of these bonding events that could be improved, it would be the addition of voice acting, as this would make some of these scenes so much more impactful. Managing the days that lead up to the next major event requires a lot of consideration. If you've played the recent Persona games, you'll know exactly what to expect. Most of your days will be spent bonding with characters, participating in activities to raise your royal virtues, and working through both the optional dungeons and the lengthy major dungeons. Setting out from the city also requires some thought. You'll need to plan out your route with consideration of travel time and weather conditions, as bad weather makes battles more difficult. Completion of these optional dungeons are required to complete side quests and bounties, and you're going to want to do this prior to taking on the chapter's main dungeons. Unfortunately, the designs of these optional dungeons leave a lot to be desired. They are all carbon copies of previous optional dungeons with no unique features. The same can be said about the optional towns that you visit along the way, which are unexplorable with static images and menus. At least the major dungeons are a bit more interesting. These are all massive with distinguishing features, often requiring a few days to complete due to needing to replenish your MP. While these dungeons can get a bit repetitive towards the end of them, working through them, collecting everything I could, and building up my party were still some of the high points of the game. Now it's time for the combat. Metaphor features a hybrid between overworld and turn-based combat, and this works very similar to Trails Through Daybreak, except not quite as good. You can attack enemies on the map, and your attack style will change based on the archetype that you have equipped. Weaker enemies can be destroyed through this combat, which is a great time saver when crawling through the lengthy dungeons. Enemies at or above your level will instead be stunned, which takes you into the turn-based battle at a great advantage. Similarly, if they hit you, you'll go into battle with a great disadvantage. This system works well most of the time, and I felt it was a great addition, even if it did cause some frustration when being hit from behind and then slaughtered in battle, or when Will unknowingly loses all of his health, resulting in a game over. It is the turn-based system, however, where the combat truly shines. It features a press turn system and works pretty much the same as most of the SMT games. If you're unfamiliar, this means that if you exploit a weakness, you'll get an extra turn, but if your attack is blocked or if it misses, you'll lose a turn. The same rule applies to enemies too, which means that going into battle with strengths and weaknesses in mind should be your number one priority. Aside from regularly attacking from the front or back rows, your equipped archetypes will provided with a number of unique abilities that can be used in battle. Mages, for instance, come with a range of elemental attacks, which is great for exploiting weaknesses, while knights have high endurance and abilities designed to attract the attention of enemies. You also need to consider synergy attacks, which allows two archetypes to unleash a joint attack. This costs 2 turn icons but can be highly effective if used at the right time. And that's all there really is to it. The combat does not reinvent the wheel, but it doesn't need to since it's a proven system that still holds up today. As you would hope, the boss fights are the standout battles here, and they feel epic. This is partly because of the awesome designs, such as my good friend Great Worm Homo Butterer here, and also because of the boss's music. In terms of difficulty, I played the game on normal and did everything I could without much grinding. Strangely, I found most of the bosses to be on the easy side, with some of the dungeon enemies causing me more trouble. But this may also be due to me being stingy with MP outside of boss fights and strategically setting up my party for bosses based on the intel I previously gathered back in town. Aside from your basic equipment that you'll constantly be finding and purchasing, the major way to customize your party is through their archetypes, which, like I mentioned before, are basically classes. There are 46 archetypes in total, each of them part of a base lineage. For example, to unlock the wizard archetype with more powerful skills, you'll need to reach level 20 with a mage archetype. But it's not enough to simply focus on a single lineage, as the more archetype abilities a character learns, the more flexibility they'll have moving forward. This is because you're enabled to inherit a certain number of abilities learnt from other archetypes. Mixing and matching archetypes and abilities is so much fun, and I can guarantee that my setup will be completely different to yours. I can find no fault in this archetype upgrade system. You are constantly unlocking new ways to play, with more flexibility increasing as the game goes on. This is exactly how RPG mechanics should be. Metaphor Re-Fantazio is one of those titles that people are going to be talking about for a long time. This Persona-like JRPG experience achieves exactly what it sets out to do: emulate the highly successful Persona formula such as social links, bonding, and the time management, and apply it to a brand new fantasy setting. The art direction here is also top tier, and this is highlighted by the menus and the human/monster designs. The actual visual quality, however, is generations behind. Some of the optional dungeons are also incredibly bland and almost identical to the ones before them. In terms of storytelling, it is a really enjoyable ride and driven by a great cast of characters such as my boy, Haizme. It's just a shame that the pacing is really slow at times, with nothing you can do to break it up. Then you have your typical SMT turn-based system, which creates some great battles, particularly with the boss fights. This doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it works really well thanks to the excellent archetype system, which provides loads of flexibility. If you're into SMT or Persona titles, Metaphor should be your next stop, as it delivers on just about every front. But the question is it Game of the Year or even RPG of the Year worthy? I think it falls a little short there, especially as it's up against some other behemoth titles released earlier in the year. What are your thoughts on Metaphor Re-Fantazio? Have you played it yet? What did you think? Let me know in the comments below. This was Hellfire RPGs, thanks for watching. If you liked this video, it would help me out a lot to hit that like button and sub for more RPG content coming soon. You can also hit that super thanks to support the channel. See you next time.